The tank is dead. Long live the tank. Since its invention, the tank has generated a certain amount of controversy. Originally designed across no man's land, protected from withering machine gun and rifle fire, the tank has evolved into something of a centerpiece for the modern military. The firepower, speed, and protection of these vehicles, and how many each nation operates, have become yardsticks by which militaries are measured. But people have continuously called the time of death on the tank due to the appearance of various counters. However, despite countless epitaphs, the tank just won't die. Today we're doing something a little different than our usual articles. Rather than just looking at a single vehicle, we're taking a look at the history of the tank is dead claims and the history of anti-tank systems. If you like what we do and want to see more of it, don't forget to like the video, and if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss a single upload. Questions were already being raised about the future of the tank even as the First World War began to wind down. Major General Jackson, as part of a lecture given in 1919, called the tank a freak, with the circumstances of its birth exceptional and not likely to reoccur. While the circumstances may have been exceptional, the machine gun was not going away anytime soon, and so neither was the tank. At the same time, the emergence of newer anti-tank systems called into question the viability of the tank. Winston Churchill himself in 1920 spoke about anti-tank grenades fired from rifles, inflicting mortal injury on the wonderful little instrument. In the interwar years, no one was quite sure what the future held for this strange new machine. Nations were skeptical of investing into this new form of warfare, yet they could not discount it either. The next large-scale use of the tank was during the Spanish Civil War. Despite the use of dedicated anti-tank guns and early versions of the Molotov cocktail, both sides continued to use tanks, most notably the German Panzer I and Soviet T-26, but also designing and producing several indigenous designs. The war had certainly not killed off the tank, but it did demonstrate the need for heavier armor and guns. The 45mm gun of the T-26 proved decisive when fighting German and Italian light tanks, as it could engage them outside the range of their own machine gun armament. Despite the proliferation of anti-tank weapons, the Second World War would also see prodigious use of the tank, from the battlefields of Europe to the deserts of North Africa and even the islands of the Pacific. Where the infantry went, the armor was sure to follow. Although some commentators, including Major General Fuller, one of Britain's foremost armored theorists at the time, doubted the tank could survive on a battlefield with so many anti-tank weapons, these systems only proved the need for closer integration between the infantry and the tanks, as well as good coordination with air and artillery support. When used correctly, an armored division could deal mortal blows to enemy armies. Late in the war, the battlefield became ever more hostile to the tank, with additional threats appearing in the form of improved, man-portable anti-tank systems, such as the American bazooka and German Panzerfaust. The aircraft also grew in prominence, with bombers like the German Ju-87 and Russian Il-2 earning fearsome reputations as tank killers. By the end of the Second World War and the start of the Cold War, the tank was in a difficult position. The emergence and proliferation of high-explosive anti-tank and squash-head rounds allowed even the common infantryman to kill the heaviest of tanks. Protecting against such systems would require a tank to be so heavily armored it had room for little else. Some nations, namely France and West Germany, would eschew heavy armor in favor of speed and a smaller target profile, trusting that mobility would allow the tank to escape return fire. The Cold War would also see the development of the anti-tank guided missile. This allowed infantry squads to fight tanks at longer combat ranges than before, without the need for heavier and cumbersome systems such as anti-tank guns. Such systems were also mounted onto vehicles for improved mobility and additional ammunition capacity. In most armies, the ATGM carrier has supplanted the traditional gun-armed tank destroyer in the role of engaging hostile armor, although some nations, such as Italy and Japan, operate wheeled gun-armed tank destroyers in terrain more conducive to high-mobility gun systems. Anti-tank missiles would rise to prominence in the 1970s with the use of American TOW missiles in Vietnam and Soviet AT-3 Sagers in the Middle East during the Yom Kippur War. While these developments increased the threat to tanks and other armored vehicles, early missiles required the operator to keep visual track of the target and manually guide the weapon to the tank, allowing tank crews to target the missile operator, killing or suppressing them, or obscuring their view with smoke or dust created by firing machine gun bursts ahead of the tank. The heavy losses suffered by some Israeli tank units in the Yom Kippur War would spark debate in U.S. newspapers a few years later, as the Army prototyped their new XM-1 main battle tank. The Washington Post would call the decision to proceed with new tanks a life-or-death bet. In private, however, the U.S. Army determined about 60% of armor losses on both sides were inflicted by tanks, and that, however deadly anti-tank missiles were, Israeli tankers claimed that if they spotted the launch, they had about an 80% chance of evading the shot. The other major threat to the tank that emerged around this time was the attack helicopter. With more endurance and loitering capability than an attack aircraft, the helicopter could conceal itself behind terrain obstacles and pop up unexpectedly to engage armor with ATGMs before using its high speed to quickly reposition or retire. However, despite the danger the helicopter posed, it remained vulnerable to short-range air defense systems such as man-portable surface-to-air missiles and mobile anti-aircraft gun systems. A tank could even engage a helicopter with its machine guns or the main gun if the gunner was feeling adventurous. Throughout this time period, however, the tank remained a critical component of any nation's armed forces. Composite and explosive reactive armor helped to protect tanks against the myriad of threats without turning them into immobile bunkers, while improved fire control systems helped improve the lethality of the tank. Thermal and night vision optics allowed them to fight effectively regardless of the time of day or state of weather. Active protection systems also started to appear, including both soft kill, designed to disrupt a missile's guidance, and hard kill, designed to disrupt a missile's warhead by damage or destruction systems. Since the turn of the century, the tank's role had been somewhat in doubt, especially in the West. With the conclusion of the Cold War and the Gulf War, the need for large numbers of armored vehicles was simply not there, and militaries began to downsize as the threat of war dwindled. The tank also seemed unnecessary for the missions Western militaries were undertaking, especially in the asymmetric battlegrounds of Iraq and Afghanistan, where special forces and drone strikes seemed to come to the fore against mortar attacks and improvised explosive devices. There was perhaps the question of, what does the next war look like? Should the Army still plan for peer conflicts? Or was counterinsurgency the new focus of the military? Was an armored direct fire support vehicle like the tank relevant in the modern day? There is perhaps no real answer to this question, as every war takes on a unique identity, and it is difficult to codify what a future conflict would look like. Nevertheless, some countries, such as Belgium and the Netherlands, decided to retire their tank fleets, replacing them with wheeled tank destroyers or not at all, respectively. Canada likewise intended to replace their tanks with the Stryker mobile gun system. However, Canada reversed this decision and has instead acquired refurbished Leopard 2 tanks. The Netherlands has also reintroduced the tank into its army, although in a unique arrangement, the country operates 18 Leopard 2s leased from Germany as the 4th company of the joint Dutch-German 414 Tank Battalion. Belgium's still happy, though. In 2020, the Nagorno-Karabakh War gave rise to another weapon, the unmanned aerial vehicle. Although drones had been used in warfare for decades prior, their usage in this conflict by Azerbaijan has been called a decisive factor in their success on the battlefield. The Turkish Bayraktar TB2 gained particular notoriety. Images and camera footage suggest these drones accounted for nearly 90 Armenian tanks and over 200 artillery pieces and missile systems. The widespread use of drones raised questions about both their capabilities and the capabilities of modern militaries to defend against such systems. The next test of the tank has been in Ukraine. perhaps the largest conflict in Europe since the Yugoslav wars. The scale of tank losses is similarly large, on a scale unseen since the Gulf War 30 years ago, with at least 1,400 Russian and over 300 Ukrainian tanks having been damaged, destroyed, or captured. The proliferation of drones and anti-tank weapons to Ukraine has certainly contributed to Russia's heavy tank losses, although these casualties have been exacerbated by other factors. Lack of sufficient infantry support has in some cases allowed Ukrainian infantry to engage tanks in relative safety, and the use of armor in built-up urban environments, most notably Mariupol, allowed Ukrainian forces to flank and engage the sides and rear of Russian tanks, or engage them at very close ranges where anti-tank weapons could be most effective. There were also severe Russian problems with logistics, maintenance, training, command, and control, which further led to horrible losses. However, despite these clear vulnerabilities, many to do with organizational errors rather than design flaws, both sides have continued to deploy armor onto the battlefield. Ukraine continues to operate donated Western and captured Russian tanks, while Russia has recently announced that it will even modernize several hundred ancient T-62s. So, is the age of tanks finally at an end, nearly a century after their debut? Well, not exactly. No nation is in a rush to get rid of their tanks, and manufacturers clearly see a market for them. Rheinmetall unveiled their new KF-51 Panther in June, and General Dynamics recently unveiled their new Abrams X in October this year. Protection is also improving, with hard kill systems like Trophy appearing on more and more vehicles. The battlefield has become much more lethal to the tank, requiring closer integration with infantry and support elements, but it is the tank's capability to provide mobile, direct armored fire support, and not its vulnerability to other threats on the battlefield, that will dictate the future of the tank. And from the looks of it, the tank will continue to soldier on for many years to come. For smaller powers, though, the increasing costs of modern main battle tanks and the ever-increasing vulnerability of older, cheaper alternatives will possibly lead to those nations reevaluating their need for an armored force. Some nations may abandon the tank altogether or replace them with cheaper wheeled fighting vehicles, as Belgium has. Only time will tell. But contrary to what many commentators are saying, the Ukrainian army, which has had the most tank kills to its name in the last couple of decades, still sees value in the good old tank and is continuously asking for more tanks and armor to equip its forces in their fight against the Russian special military operation. This concludes our short look at the history of anti-tank systems and the many claims of the tank's obsolescence. What do you think? Is the tank dead and buried under piles of anti-tank missiles? Or is the tank still a vital part of modern war? And what do you think about this format? Would you like to see more videos like this? Or would you rather we stick to videos covering single vehicles? Let us know in the comments. And remember, if you want to contribute more directly, consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. The money comes back to you in the form of bigger and better videos. Until next time, keep us in your sights.